shark still looks fake.
Sequels! Love it or hate it, they're here to stay. Just take a look at the rest of this year's lineup. A good sequel can build upon the original, adding layers to our favorite characters, and of course bringing audiences back to explore a world they hopefully have been pining to return to. But there was a time when adding a 2 after a movie's title wasn't as appealing to mainstream audiences as it is today. A time when, if studios made a hit, it was often attributed more to a film's star power rather than the popularity of its subject matter or genre. Although genre filmmaking certainly helped studios come to the realization that repetition meant less risk and more profit. Although I do wonder where Gone with the Wind 2 would have taken the story. And one could make the argument that 99% of sequels are just soulless corporate cash grabs. And perhaps just as many seem to be worse than what came before them, the Jaws franchise certainly being no exception. When producers Richard D. Zanuck and David Brown decided to adapt author Peter Benchley's seminal 1974 shark thriller into a feature film, they had no idea that they were about to unleash upon the world a massive media franchise and pop culture bomb that would forever change the face of cinema itself. And so, it was perhaps a foregone conclusion that Universal Pictures would spin the property into a 4-film franchise. And while the Jaws sequels don't quite measure up to the 1975 classic, there is one among them that not only went on to become one of the most successful films of its time, but is a film that even the most jaded of fans will admit manages to rise above the rest.
I've had some experience with sharks.
What have you?
Yeah, and I think a great white might have done this.
Carcharodon calcareus?
That's right.
What makes you think there might be one in these waters?
Going out? Yeah. You're like sailing?
If you're grounded, what are we doing this for? Practice?
Yeah, practice.
Why are we here? Why don't we go to the beach? We can putz around, we can make some money, pick up some girls.
You don't think that if a shark was destroyed, that another shark could come in?
Sharks don't take things personally, Mr. Brody.
It's obvious the man has made up his mind.
You bet your life I made up my mind. But I'm telling you, and I'm telling everybody at this table, that that's a shark. And I know what a shark looks like because I've seen one up close. And you better do something about this one, because I don't intend to go through that hell again.
Swim! Swim fast! It's a shark, Eddie!
The film is often accused of being a rehash or dumbed-down follow-up to the 1975 classic, and shifts tones from a high-seas thriller to a pure horror film, at times feeling more at home in the slasher genre than something akin to Moby Dick. Unfortunately, much like the original's infamously troubled production, the road to Jaws 2 would be racked by mechanical difficulties, unpredictable weather, angry locals, and a constant clashing of egos, ultimately running far over schedule and budget. Released in the summer of 1978, up against now classics like Grease, Heaven Can Wait, and Damien, Omen 2, in an era of gritty dramas and underground cinema, Jaws 2 introduced audiences to the era of blockbuster sequels, and welcomed back fans to another warm and friendly summer in Amity, just when they thought it was safe to go back in the water.
Come on. Show me the tank. Show me the tank. Blow up. Smile, you son of a bitch!
The cultural impact of Jaws cannot be overstated. Released on June 20th, 1975, the film literally defined the term blockbuster, in its first 78 days surpassing The Godfather as the highest-grossing film of all time in North America, and becoming the first film ever to cross $100 million at the box office, ultimately taking in $193 million in its initial run, or over $470 million today. And just days after Jaws was released to record-breaking success across the globe, Universal Pictures was eager to move forward with a sequel. Jaws producers Richard D. Zanuck and David Brown were initially hesitant to pursue the project, and Zanuck and Brown wondered if they could catch lightning in a bottle twice. However, the wheels of production were already spinning at Universal Pictures, and the two moguls eventually chose to helm the project themselves, not wanting to see their hard work squandered in someone else's hands. Little did they know, however, that Jaws 2 would see an arduous 18-month pre-production process plagued by creative dead ends and studio politics. Jaws author Peter Benchley and 2001: A Space Odyssey author Arthur C. Clarke both pitched story ideas to Zanuck and Brown, but the producers found both creative legends' concepts to be too far removed from the heart and soul of the original film. Writer Howard Sackler, who had contributed uncredited revisions to the original film screenplay, including Quint's defining Indianapolis monologue, was brought on board to develop the script. Originally, Sackler conceived Jaws 2 as a prequel, which would focus on a young Quint, played by actor Robert Shaw in the original film, recounting his horrific shark encounters following the sinking of the real-life World War II vessel, the USS Indianapolis. However, then Universal president Sidney Sheinberg felt that fans would be expecting to return to Amity and see the continuing story of Chief Brody and his family, and ultimately rejected Sackler's initial concept. While the producers attempted to bring back as many cast and crew members as possible, Jaws director Steven Spielberg, whose career skyrocketed following the film's history-making success, turned down the sequel, choosing to focus on his own original project, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, instead. Spielberg also felt that he had already made the definitive shark movie and didn't see the need to continue the story any further. The director would also later state that the nightmarish experience of making the original film was enough to keep him out of the water for good. Although initially expected to return for the sequel, actor Richard Dreyfuss, who played shark expert Matt Hooper, would also follow Spielberg onto the production of Close Encounters, his role ultimately being written out of the film. Director John D. Hancock was brought on to replace Spielberg, recommended by writer Howard Sackler. At the time, Hancock was best known for directing the 1973 Academy Award-nominated sports drama Bang the Drum Slowly, and came with a much more subtle and bleak vision of the follow-up than producers were expecting. Hancock envisioned the film focusing on the economic void left in Amity following the disastrous events of the first film, and also wanted to incorporate elements from Jaws author Peter Benchley's original novel that had been left out of the 1975 adaptation, including an organized crime subplot. Actor and screenwriter Dorothy Tristan, Hancock's wife, was tasked with redeveloping the script, which would feature many scenes and characters that would later be cut from the final version. Tristan's script focused much more heavily on the human elements, and Hancock wasn't interested in making an effects-heavy Hollywood action film, his sequel being much darker in tone than the original film. However, Universal wanted a leaner, more straightforward approach to the story with a brighter tone more akin to the '75 film, feeling Hancock's take was too gritty of a follow-up to their beloved property. After 18 months of development, principal photography began in June 1977, but after only 1 month of shooting, Hancock and Tristan were fired by Universal. Hancock would later state that he had engaged in a power struggle with producers Zanuck and Brown and studio heads, and that company politics ultimately led to his departure. Also, allegedly, Hancock unknowingly fired an actor who happened to be the girlfriend of a Universal executive. With no director and no script, Zanuck and Brown found themselves going back to the drawing board. Hearing news of the project's troubled start, then president of Universal Pictures Film Division Ned Tannen began to consider pulling the plug on the production altogether as Zanuck and Brown raced to recover from their setbacks. While multiple directors were considered to replace Hancock, including Otto Preminger and John Frankenheimer, French director Jeannot Szwarc was tasked with carrying the production forward. At the time, Szwarc was primarily known for his background in television, where he worked closely with Jaws 2 producer Joe Alves, who would later go on to direct Jaws 3D. His only directing credit. Following Jaws 2, Szwarc would go on to direct 1980's time-traveling romance Somewhere in Time, starring Christopher Reeve, as well as the 1984 comic book movie Misfire, Supergirl. Zanuck and Brown ultimately chose to order a page-one rewrite, and Szwarc focused his writing efforts primarily on the action sequences, while original Jaws script contributor Carl Gottlieb was brought in to polish the dialogue and create further development for the characters. Gottlieb had the idea of incorporating the then popular youth culture of car cruising, but instead of hanging out in hot rods, the teens would ride the wind in their own custom sailboats. Szwarc also wanted to assign each of the young characters a unique personality trait in order to make them feel more memorable, and further enhance the role of Chief Martin Brody and his wife Ellen, who would once again be played by Lorraine Gary. Roy Scheider was originally set to star in Michael Cimino's 1978 Academy Award-winning Vietnam War epic, The Deer Hunter, but later quit the film over creative differences regarding its ending, and the part ultimately went to a young Robert De Niro. Scheider was under a multi-film contract with Universal when he departed the project, and the studio was furious over his abrupt exit. However, they were willing to let Sleeping Dogs lie as long as Scheider agreed to return for Jaws 2, a deal he reluctantly accepted. And that's an understatement. Scheider was notoriously resistant to returning for the sequel, and would go on to have some extreme disagreements with director Jeannot Szwarc, frequently breaking out into heated arguments in front of cast and crew. Scheider often felt that Szwarc was ignoring his main players in favor of technical prowess, and also wanted to have a louder voice when it came to creative decisions. At one point, producer Zanuck and Brown forced a mediation between the two passionate artists, hoping to reconcile their differences. But unfortunately, the meeting quickly led to Scheider and Szwarc engaging in a physical confrontation, and the producers had to step in to break the men apart. In fact, Scheider hated making Jaws 2 so much that he allegedly attempted to convince the producers that he had lost his mind, and during production, purposely demolished a hotel room in hopes to get out of his contract on account of insanity. It didn't work. As consolation to Scheider for his cooperation, the studio agreed to count Jaws 2 as 2 films, allowing Scheider to get out of his contract after the film's completion. Scheider would also go on to be paid 4 times his salary received on the first movie, some reports stating as much as $500,000, a huge sum at the time, also receiving a share of the sequel's net profits. While Szwarc later stated that as production went on, Scheider became less and less resistant and ultimately gave his all to the role, Scheider would seemingly remain bitter about the experience, even going as far to write a cold letter to Szwarc restating his grievances after the film's release. While the town sequences were once again mostly shot in Martha's Vineyard, the beach and ocean-based sequences were shot almost entirely on the northwestern panhandle of Florida, near Fort Walton Beach, and principal photography would last from August to December 1977. The cast and crew would battle frequent changes in weather and temperature, and at times even had to suck on ice cubes in order to prevent their breath from showing in the cold. Additionally, in the fall, the crew had to head back to Martha's Vineyard for reshoots, where they had to create fake leaves to maintain the illusion of the summer season. And at one point, in order to beat the Christmas deadline, the production was forced to shoot a total of 22 consecutive days without a single break. As was the case with the original film's shoot, many locals resented the presence of the cast and crew, and most business owners flat out refused to cooperate with the production a second time around. And Universal Go Home t-shirts soon began circulating across town. Facing immense financial pressure from the studio, a leading actor on a rampage, and an exhausted cast and crew, Jeannot Szwarc would go on to face even more troubles once the shark finally made it into the water. Set 4 years after the events of Jaws, the film opens with two divers photographing the wreckage of the orca, who are ferociously attacked by a gigantic great white. That evening, Chief Brody races against time to attend the grand opening of a new Amity Island hotel, funded by real estate mogul Len Peterson and championed by Mayor Larry Vaughn, where we also meet some local schoolmates. The following day, the young friends head out onto the water in their prized sailboats, a regular activity in the summer season, unaware that a deadly shark looms nearby. Elsewhere, a boater pulls a water skier just offshore, and the skier is soon pursued by the hungry shark, which quickly pulls her beneath the surface. Seeing that her friend has vanished, the boat driver slows to a stop to search the water. However, the shark isn't finished yet, and soon comes smashing into the side of the boat, the desperate woman having no choice but to pour gasoline all over herself and light the boat on fire? For the opening title sequence, Szwarc wanted to steer away from the impending doom offered in the original film's opening sequence, and instead portray the ocean floor as a dreamlike world unto itself. Szwarc and the producers knowing full well audiences would come into the film already expecting a monster to be lurking in the depths. The sequence was actually shot in the waters off Catalina Island near Los Angeles, the waters in northern Florida being far too murky at times for underwater shooting due to stronger currents. However, for the moments where the shark is seen, shooting in the open ocean being far too unpredictable to properly capture the robotic beast, the production filmed in an underwater tank at Universal's MCM Studios. The scene in which the water skier and boater are attacked was partially developed in order to allow Szwarc and the producers enough time to revise the script, as the sequence would take several weeks to shoot. For this set piece, Szwarc and the producers recruited a champion water skier to handle the choppy waters. To achieve the underwater perspective of the shark, Szwarc tasked an additional unit to develop a rig that could move at the underwater speed necessary to capture the shot. A few bystanders witness the explosion and are soon paid a visit by a suspicious Chief Brody, who meanwhile has Deputy Hendricks scavenging the ocean floor for evidence from the burned wreckage. After a pleasant family breakfast smoking around his wife and children over a nice bowl of Cheerios,
You eat Cheerios.
Brody is alerted to a partially eaten whale washed ashore, and upon further investigation, suspects a shark may be responsible. To accomplish a New England aesthetic in Florida, the crew constructed an entire 80-foot lighthouse on a Florida beach, which was used in several sequences throughout the film. The dead orca found chewed up on the beach is a dig at the 1977 film Orca, in which the killer whale attacks a great white shark early on in the film, which itself was meant as a slight against Jaws. While driving along the beach, Brody spots a large piece of driftwood in the surf and heads into the water to retrieve it. However, a charred body suddenly reveals itself from beneath, startling Brody out of the water. The next day, Brody takes station atop a shark tower on a busy Amity beach, to the chagrin of Mayor Vaughn and Len Peterson. Suddenly, Brody spots a mysterious mass moving in the water towards the oblivious swimmers and sounds the alarm, sending the beachgoers screaming to shore as he fires his pistol off like a madman. Unfortunately for Brody, the ominous mass turns out to be a school of bluefish. However, while staring longingly at his 1975 Amity Man of the Year award, Brody learns that the photographs developed from the deadly attack on the two divers reveal the wreckage of the orca. And at the lab, he further discovers that another deadly shark indeed lurks in their waters. Brody takes the evidence to Mayor Vaughn and the city council, but they again refuse to hear his pleas and vote to expel him as chief of police. The following morning, Brody's oldest son Mike sneaks out to go sailing with his friends, his little brother Sean forcing Mike to take him along. The group sails out onto the open water, and nearby, a recreational diver is attacked by the rogue predator as it swims directly towards the teenagers. Tina and Eddie separate from the group and are quickly singled out by the shark, which charges the boat and knocks Eddie into the water, leaving Tina to witness her boyfriend's untimely demise. For the sailing sequences, the young cast would undergo 4 weeks of intensive training, and the actors would often practice their sailing skills between camera setups. Additionally, retired Navy SEAL Frank Sparks, who had done stunt work for actor Richard Dreyfuss on the original film, was hired to get the young actors in sailing shape, running them through grueling routines, and many of the cast referring to the experience like being in boot camp. Several of the younger cast members would be recast from John D. Hancock's production, the teenage characters having little to no dialogue or development in the original script, and many of the actors being hired more for their appearances rather than their acting skills. Ann Dusenberry had appeared in several television shows before landing the role of Miss Amity herself, Tina Wilcox, which would mark her first starring role. Dusenberry would retire from her acting career in the early 1990s, and today is married to famed Terminator composer Brad Fiedel. Donna Wilkes had seen smaller roles in popular soap operas before winning the role of Jackie Peters, and like Ann Dusenberry, would see a successful career in television before retiring in the 1990s. Cindy Grover, who plays Lucy, would have a short-lived acting career and would see her last role in the 1981 TV movie The Choice. Model-turned-actor Martha Swanwick would make her one and only on-screen appearance as Marge in Jaws 2, and would later trade a career in acting for a successful life as a prominent lawyer, specializing in workers' rights. Gigi Vorgan, playing Brooke Peters, had gone on to see moderate roles in film and television throughout the 1980s, most notably in the popular Dallas spin-off series Knots Landing, before permanently leaving acting in 1994. Brody learns of the most recent diver attack and that his sons and their friends are out on the water. He, Ellen, and Hendrix head out in search of the kids, Brody summoning a rescue helicopter. They find a traumatized Tina hiding in her boat and bring her aboard. With another rescue vessel on the way, Brody leaves the other 3 in Tina's boat while he heads further out to sea. The shark begins its assault on the teenagers, capsizing Doug's boat, Doug narrowly escaping its bite. The shark continues its attack, destroying all but a few of the boats, and while no one is killed, the group is left stranded, and 2 of the friends take an injured Mike back to shore. Thankfully, a helicopter soon arrives at the scene, the friends elated to finally have their escape. Unfortunately, this is a shark movie. The shark sinks the helicopter and resumes its attack on the frightened teens, knocking Sean and Bob into the water. Marge dives in after Sean, managing to get him to safety before... Schwarc set out to show the actual shark more frequently and much earlier in the film than its predecessor. However, like the original production, the mechanical monsters used in Jaws 2 would be a point of great frustration for the producers and director Schwarc. Following the completion of Jaws, the robotic sharks were essentially left to rot on the backlot of Universal Studios, and when it came time to make Jaws 2, all that was salvageable for the production were the chromoly tube frames. Jaws special effects legend Robert A. Matty would return to create the marine monsters needed for the sequel, creating 3 sharks in total, utilizing the frames left over from the original production. Matty and his special effects partner Roy Arbogast would develop many innovative techniques to generate more fluid and realistic movements in their animatronics, including creating a new head for the sharks that used a more advanced mouth mechanism. However, the corrosive effects of ocean saltwater would again have a damaging effect on the sharks, and filming in the Gulf of Mexico also meant large swells and overall rougher seas, a time-consuming combination that often left the production team fuming. The primary shark, known on set as the luxury shark, was once again mounted on a gigantic 3-ton platform submerged on the ocean floor, also once again requiring hours of setup. Michael C. Butler would take over as director of photography from award-winning Jaws cinematographer Bill Butler, no relation, his brother David Butler also overseeing most of the second unit photography. While the first film dealt with one boat at a time, because the second film featured multiple watercrafts in camera interacting with the shark, setup between shots became painfully hit and miss. If the wind or tide happened to change, the sailboats, which also moved at a vastly different speed from one another, would inevitably be dragged out of the shot, and the crew would have to restage the shark and boats all over again. At some points, the strong currents nearly toppled over the underwater shark platform entirely. A simpler version of the shark was designed to be towed by a boat for instances where the platform shark was malfunctioning. However, this presented its own challenges as the filmmakers had to wait for the waves from the towboat to settle and pray that the shark would arrive within shot and at the perfect angle and at the perfect moment. For shots where only the shark's dorsal fin is visible, the team used a simple sea-slid dummy fin pulled by a speedboat in order to achieve the effect. Curiously, the shark's tail fin is noticeably absent throughout the entirety of the film. For certain shots, Szwarc wanted the audiences to feel as if they were directly behind the shark, and actually placed a horse saddle on the back of the mechanical model, and the camera operator would literally ride the shark with the camera over his shoulder. For shots requiring more fluid movements from the shark, Szwarc once again utilized footage of real sharks captured for the original film by Australian diving couple Ron and Valerie Taylor. Mike and his friends reach shore, and Brody learns of their encounter with the shark and that Sean is still stranded at sea. Brody quickly locates the fatigued teens as they approach Cable Junction Island and attempts to tow them back to safety. However, in the process of getting the tow rope over to the group, Brody accidentally catches a large underwater electrical cable. Suddenly, the shark once again intervenes and viciously attacks Brody and the surviving friends, surrounding them on all sides. Brody transverses the raised electrical cable onto a small raft and uses a paddle to create rhythmic sounds in order to attract the shark to the cable and away from the screaming teens. The shark slowly turns towards Brody, who hopes the man-eater will not attack him from behind. And the shark charges Brody head on.
All right, you big bastard! Come on! I got something for you now!
Dad! Watch out!
Come on! Come on! Come on, open wide! Open wide! See ya!
Okay, open wide say ah doesn't quite have the same impact as
Smile, you son of a bitch!
But what really matters is that Brody saves the town once again, and the survivors head back to Amity, living to swim another day. Cable Junction Island, the small rocky island housing the electrical relay station used in the film's climax, also became a point of some frustration for the filmmakers. The island was actually a large anchored set built on two sizable barges from thousands of square feet of plastic and fiberglass, making the set extremely slippery and almost impossible to transverse. Additionally, the set was not properly anchored, and one night during production the barges broke loose and began to drift out to sea, the crew ultimately having to tug the floating set back to shore in the middle of the night. Actor and director Keith Gordon, who plays Doug Fetterman, was only 16 years old when he was cast in the blockbuster sequel in March 1977, and would be one of the few young cast members to be carried over from Hancock's production to Szwarc's. According to Gordon, much of the teens' dialogue in the film was also improvised. Actor, writer, and producer Billy Van Zandt plays Bob, marking his feature film debut. Van Zandt would go on to have a successful career in television and married iconic B-movie scream queen Adrienne Barbeau in 1992. Mark Gruner, who plays Mike Brody, had also come from a promising career in television prior to Jaws 2, which would end up being Gruner's final screen performance before retiring from acting. Mark Gilpin, playing Mike's younger brother Sean Brody, would go on to see a moderate career in acting throughout the 1980s before also retiring from the craft. G. Thomas Dunlop plays Tommy Weldon, and Jaws 2 would represent a very brief foray into Hollywood for the young actor before moving on from the industry. Like many of his fellow cast members, actor Gary Springer had a growing background in television before getting the part of Andy Nicholas, and also like many of his co-stars, he would retire from acting just a few years following the completion of Jaws 2. John Dukakis plays Paul Polo Loman, and would go on to see a prominent career in political campaigning as well as the music industry. Ben Marley, who plays Patrick, would go on to see a successful career in acting in both film and television, making appearances in the award-winning blockbuster Apollo 13 and the popular crime series Law & Order. Cast as the mayor's son, New York actor David Elliott had won a string of roles in film and television before winning the part of Larry Vaughn Jr., and would receive steady work following Jaws 2, both as an actor and contributing behind-the-scenes work in art direction and set design. The late actor Gary Dubin, perhaps best known at the time for his voice work in Disney's animated feature The Aristocats and a recurring role on TV's The Partridge Family, plays the ill-fated Eddie Merchant. Dubin was actually terrified of the water when he was cast in the part and didn't know how to swim. Szwarc and the producers would use his real-life phobia to capture true terror in his performance. Lorraine Gary's role as Ellen Brody is expanded on from both her part in the 1975 film and from her character's part in Sackler and Tristan's original script. Initially, Gary was intended to play a much smaller role in the sequel, meant to simply be a motherly character to her sons and a supporting figure to Roy Scheider's Chief Brody. However, Gary had not only shared a professional relationship with Szwarc prior to production, but was also the wife of then Universal President Sidney Sheinberg. Her character was ultimately redeveloped to be a more active player in the film. Joseph Mascalo played real estate developer Len Peterson and had previously worked with Jeannot Szwarc on various television productions. Mascalo had replaced actor Dana Elcar in the role after Szwarc replaced Hancock, the original concept for the role having been much more villainous under Hancock's vision. The character also had evolved into a potential love interest for Ellen Brody, and Elcar was no longer well suited for the role. The late great Maurray Hamilton would once again return to the part of Amity Mayor Larry Vaughn. However, midway through shooting, while only a small portion of his scenes had been completed, Hamilton told the producers without notice that he had to fly back to New York to be with his wife, who had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. As a compromise, the producers brought in all necessary cast members and completed the remainder of Hamilton's scenes in just 2 days, and then released the actor from the picture. Actor Jeffrey Kramer, who went on to become a major television producer, once again returns as Brody's right-hand man, Deputy Hendricks, and would develop a close friendship with director Jeannot Szwarc over the course of Jaws 2's production. One would assume that an actor resisting a role as intensely as Roy Scheider had would result in a subpar performance. So it is perhaps a great credit to Scheider's talent that he delivers, in my opinion, an equally riveting performance in Jaws 2. In fact, the behind-the-scenes anguish surrounding the actor may just have been the perfect atmosphere for a more desperate and slightly unhinged Chief Brody.
Terry Goldsmith for The Wind and the Lion.
And the winner is John Williams for Jaws.
In assembling the original cast and crew for the sequel, perhaps the biggest win for Zanuck and Brown, aside from securing actor Roy Scheider, was the return of now legendary award-winning composer John Williams. Due to production delays, however, Williams would be forced to begin composing the score for Jaws 2 before filming was complete, and director Szwarc would work closely with the composer to show him early edited sequences of the film, as well as utilizing storyboards to help keep the music on track. Szwarc requested that Williams compose a slightly more complicated score than his original, and Williams set out to achieve a broader, more youthful sound for the sequel, including utilizing longer notes and a larger orchestra. While Williams' signature shark theme is used more sparingly here, the overall score certainly lives and breathes within the same universe as the first film, while still being treated with a more bombastic approach in order to accentuate the more frequent thrills. A bare-bones soundtrack album of Williams' music was released in 1978, however, it lacked several pieces from the film's score and was also presented out of sequence. To remedy this, in 2015, Intrada Records released a 2-disc special edition of Williams' complete composition, now in chronological order, and featured the original 1978 soundtrack on the second disc.
After the sensational return of Jaws to the screen, what could possibly be more terrifying than Jaws 2? The terror continues.
Despite being Universal Pictures' most expensive film ever made at that time, having a budget triple the size of its predecessor at $30 million, the film became a gigantic success for the studio and producers Zanuck and Brown. Released on June 16, 1978 in over 600 theaters across North America, the film opened to the highest grossing box office weekend of its day, a record $9.8 million, and went on to gross over $77 million by the end of its 1978 run, making Jaws 2 the highest grossing sequel ever, until Rocky II. Ultimately, upon subsequent releases, Jaws 2 would rake in over $200 million worldwide and would remain near the top of the list of highest-grossing films of all time for nearly 2 decades.
Lots of teeth, lots of screams. I thought it was a sloppy film, but apparently it worked for one simple reason. The Jaws shark has become a classic movie villain that ranks with Frankenstein's monster and Dracula. Apparently, people will always pay to see a great white shark picture now, especially if it's released in the summertime when people are thinking about going back and doing some swimming.
I agree with you, Gene. It was pure trash, as a matter of fact. Now, the original picture had a lot of suspense. In this one, the shark...
The film received mixed but mostly favorable reviews. While nearly all critics agreed that it did not stand up to the original, those favoring the film praised director Jeannot Szwarc's cinematography and tension building, in addition to the special effects, while detractors criticized the hollow story and characters, labeling the film as a soulless retread of its predecessor. For the marketing of the film, Universal would order the creation of a plethora of merchandise which capitalized on the popularity of the first film. Products included everything from Coca-Cola paper cups, shark tooth necklaces and coloring books, to trading cards, beach towels, and even a model truck kit based on the one driven by Chief Brody in both films. Unlike the first film, Jaws 2 saw multiple diverse movie posters produced for its marketing, including many international versions, all managing to capture the menacing simplicity of the original film's iconic artwork. In April 1978, Universal, via its MCA publishing moniker, partnered with Bantam Books to produce a novelization of the film. The late author and screenwriter Hank Searles was tasked with adapting the film into a nearly 300-page novel, based on an earlier draft of the script credited to Howard Sackler and Dorothy Tristan. The novel portrays Amity as a ghost town following the horrific attacks of the first film, and includes a major subplot of Chief Brody trying to stop the construction of a massive casino sponsored by Mayor Vaughn and other city officials, and secretly being co-funded by the Mafia. Additionally, the shark is revealed to not only be a large female, but is actually the mate of the male shark featured in the first film, and is discovered to be pregnant. The novel received mostly mixed reviews, although many of its fans claim that it is an improvement upon its cinematic counterpart. Searles would also go on to pen the novelization of 1987's Jaws: The Revenge. I haven't read it yet, but I imagine he couldn't have gone terribly wrong. In July 1978, Dell Publishing Company released the Jaws 2 log by author and journalist Ray Loynd, a behind-the-scenes look at the making of the film, featuring photos by publicity photographer Susan Ford, daughter of former President Gerald Ford. Universal released the book primarily as promotional material, and it, unfortunately, doesn't offer much in the way of insight into the tumultuous production. The same year of its release, Universal hired comic book writer Rick Marshall and artists Gene Colan and Tom Palmer to adapt the film into a single-issue comic book which, like the novelization, would be based on an earlier, darker version of the script. Released as Marvel Super Special Issue number 6, the comic book is much bloodier than the film itself, and the shark is portrayed as far more ruthless. The adaptation received positive reviews from readers at the time, and the artwork is generally considered to be among the best of its series. In 1980, Jaws 2 saw its first official home video releases from MCA Video Cassette in exclusive VHS and DiscoVision Laserdisc formats, timed with its 1980 theatrical re-release. It would again see a reissue in both formats in the 1990s, and would go on to see its first DVD release in May 2001.
Interviews with the cast and crew, and deleted scenes from the film, Jaws 2. Get it before you go back into the water.
The DVD contained numerous special features, including a 45-minute behind-the-scenes documentary featuring interviews from the cast and crew, several of the deleted scenes, a lengthy interview with actor Keith Gordon, some text-based bonus features, a stills gallery, and the audio presented in Dolby Digital 2.0 mono. In 2016, along with the other franchise films, Universal Home Entertainment released Jaws 2 on Blu-ray for the first time, which featured most of the bonus material found on the DVD. Universal Studios expanded their popular Jaws experience, which had been part of their staple Hollywood studio tour since 1976, and opened the official Jaws ride at Universal Studios Orlando on June 7, 1990, and the attraction would later be added to their Japan theme park as well. While at first plagued by technical difficulties, the ride eventually went on to become a beloved attraction at the park before its official closure in Orlando in 2012, replaced by an expansion of the wizarding world of Harry Potter. The ride is partially inspired by the ending of Jaws 2, seeing the mechanical shark biting electrical cables and later resurfacing with burn damage for one last scare. The film is certainly a retread of familiar elements. Brody's relationship with the mayor and the city council seems unchanged despite the events of the first film, and ultimately go unresolved. While the returning main players deliver commendable performances, much of the acting from the younger cast members is questionable. And the film lacks the underlying themes and subtext prominent in the original film's screenplay. Jaws 2 plays more like a late 70s teen Scream, choosing to instead focus on a group of young and randy characters that are then picked off one by one by a disfigured and seemingly supernatural ruthless killer. Director Jeannot Szwarc perhaps doesn't receive enough credit for salvaging the production of Jaws 2. His shot compositions and ability to maintain tension throughout the latter half of the film are especially commendable given the anguish he and his crew suffered throughout production. Yes, Jaws 2 may have started the trend of pointless, money-grabbing sequels that we see tirelessly churned out today, but it is also a refreshingly pure and simple sequel, stripped down in plot and character to enhance its horror movie elements, and truly define itself as a summer popcorn monster movie, taking viewers on another terrifying adventure on the water. Fun fact: Jaws 2 is the first Hollywood sequel ever to use the number 2 in its title, as opposed to a Roman numeral. So guys, tell me what you think of Jaws 2. Would you have preferred to see John D. Hancock's version, or should Szwarc have taken the horror elements even further? And as always guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, go ahead and click like below and feel free to share. And of course, if you want to see more videos just like this one, go ahead and click subscribe.